This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
Good morning and welcome to Blood Red here on Facebook as well as our dedicated YouTube channel. I'm Guy Clark. Thanks for joining us as we get set to bring you reaction to the Champions League last 16 draw taking place in Nyon. Matt Addison and David Lynch are both with me too. And before we get to the draw today, though, we must firstly talk about the desperately sad news this morning surrounding the passing of former Liverpool manager Gerard Houllier. The Frenchman who led the Reds to 6 major honours, has passed away aged 73. Houllier was in charge at Anfield between 1998 and 2004, coming in initially as a joint manager with Roy Evans before taking sole charge in November 98 before being succeeded by Rafael Benitez. The Frenchman led the Reds to 6 major honours, 5 of which came in the calendar year of 2001, in which Liverpool won a historic treble of League Cup, FA Cup and UEFA Cup, the club's first European trophy since the 1984 European Cup win in Rome. He was also crucial in the development of modern-day legends Steven Gerrard and Jamie Carragher, as well as the likes of Sami Hyypiä, Michael Owen and Emile Heskey. David, I'll come to you first. And as I said there at the top, it's desperately sad, isn't it?
Yeah, it's terribly sad news, isn't it? I think it's telling that we've seen all these early tributes coming out to Gerard Houllier, and they're not only just referring to the fact that he's such a fantastic manager, but an incredible man as well, a real gentleman of the game, and so widely respected across football by fans of all different clubs, and any journalists and managers who ever dealt with him think he's just a great man, and he was. And in terms of his ability as a manager, I mean that list of trophies there sort of speaks for itself. And really, there's a feeling I think among Liverpool supporters that he restored the club to greatness. Really, he came into Liverpool at a time where think it'd been a difficult period really, and sort of modernised so much about the ground, the training ground, and the working habits of the entire club, and sort of brought it into the 21st century, and and then reaped the rewards for that with the trophies he brought in, and gave a lot of young supporters around that time the nights, the European nights that they'd heard about from their parents and never really experienced. And yeah, just an incredible legacy as a manager, and also as a man, as I say, just a real gentleman, and he will be sorely missed.
Yeah, as David says there, Matt, I suppose as much as the trophies, which are obviously more than appreciated by Liverpool fans, Gerard Houllier held in the highest esteem. Of course, he battled heart problems whilst he was even manager of Liverpool and came back for that historic and memorable European night against Roma. But it is sort of his legacy that he left in terms of, as David said, pulling the club into the 21st century as much as anything else.
Yeah, just a huge figure for Liverpool Football Club. There's no doubt about that. As David says there, the tributes that have come out, the sort of people who've paid tribute to him this morning, the way in which they've done so, you can just tell everything about him. And I think the word that has cropped up most is gentleman. It obviously is, as we know, the silverware, the trophies, they all speak for themselves. But what we don't always see with people in football is what they're like away from the sport. What are they like, in their own personal life? And it's clear that he was, absolutely, a gentleman, to use that word. It's, the wide range of tributes that have come in from all the different clubs, all the different roles. I think he had a role within UEFA at one time. He's obviously worked with Liverpool, with some other huge clubs across England and various other countries as well. And yeah, it's just telling that whenever some sad news like this comes out, it's always real sadness. But I think in this case, you can really feel in every single tweet, in every single comment that's come out, people are really taken aback by it, and it's such a shame to see it. But an absolute Liverpool legend. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Yeah, and David, I suppose we've seen a number of tributes, Jamie Carragher and Michael Owen, 2 notable names who have left tributes on social media. And I suppose you can't underestimate the impact that Gerard Houllier had on what was a young crop of local lads, with the likes of Steven Gerrard. I think it was Houllier, of course, who handed him the captaincy for the first time as well. And that led on the road to obviously what was great success on the pitch, but great careers for the likes of Steven Gerrard and Jamie Carragher.
Yeah, it was insightful, wasn't it, to see Carragher saying that he felt that Houllier had not only changed him as a player and brought him on as a player, but also as a human being, and sort of made him a better person. And I think, the longevity of those three players that he brought through, and it sort of speaks for itself, doesn't it, in terms of the careers they went on to have, partly under him, but also, further than that, they were fantastic players and also great representatives of Liverpool Football Club as well. So, yeah, that, says a lot about him. I think, with Gerard in particular is an interesting one, because to give him the captaincy, I believe he was 23 at the time. He's taken that armband away from Sami Hyypiä, who was a massive figure at the club at the time. That was a huge call. But obviously Gerard Houllier had the foresight to see what Steven Gerrard could be for Liverpool and what he could mean for the club. And, without that sort of moment of throwing him into the limelight and him stepping up in the way that he did, you don't get Istanbul and all the fantastic memories that Steven Gerrard gave even after Houllier had left. So, yeah, their legacy was, I suppose that's part of Houlier's legacy is the impact that those players went on to have after he'd even left the club. So, yeah, incredible.
Yeah, certainly. Desperately sad news then this morning that former Liverpool manager Gerard Houllier has passed away at the age of 73. Well, we are here, of course, to bring you live reaction to the Champions League last 16 draw that is about to get underway. Liverpool, of course, topping Group D and through to the round of 16. Of course, it was this round, Matt, last season that the Reds were knocked out in, hoping this season to go far better.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, having wrapped up the Premier League title last season, I think this is a real big competition again for Liverpool. We know that they are very much capable of winning it, right up there amongst the favourites. And I think whoever Liverpool get today, they'll be, very, very confident that they can get through. But there's certainly one or two teams that you would prefer to play, I think, going forward, just to make life a little bit easier for Liverpool. I don't think there's too much doubt about that. But yeah, as I say, whoever Liverpool get, they'll be very, very confident. And as much as there'll be certain teams that Jurgen Klopp and his players privately will probably want to avoid, I think certainly Liverpool being in the hat there is probably the team that every other team in the tournament probably doesn't want to see come up against them.
Yes, certainly. Let's list through then the teams that Liverpool can come up against. Liverpool, of course, one of the seeded sides in Pot 1, having won their group. It means that Liverpool will be away from home, first of all, and get the second leg at Anfield, and they could face either one of Atletico Madrid, Barcelona, Borussia Monchengladbach, Porto, Sevilla, Lazio, or RB Leipzig. They can't face Atalanta, and the sides in Pot 1 also cannot face sides that they either played in the group stage or those from their own country. So, David, Liverpool have pretty much the pick of the pot, as it were, other than Atalanta. Which sides are Liverpool most wanting to stay away from, and who's the plum tie for the Reds?
I think the obvious one you want to stay away from is Atletico, not just on the basis that obviously they've knocked them out last time. I think it goes deeper than that in the terms of, because you just know that they will give you an awkward game. They will make it difficult for you. I think, in some of the reflection on Liverpool going out last year, I think it was forgotten that actually Liverpool outplayed Atletico at Anfield. They were the much better side really in that game. They played really well and sort of unfortunate to go out. But that's what Atletico do. They hang in there. They make it difficult for you. They make it hard for you to get that second goal and get, just completely clear up the tie. So you just want to avoid them because it's awkward. So I think that would be the priority, and hope that maybe someone else knocks Atletico out en route to the final if possible. And in terms of who they might want, you're looking at Porto again. Those convincing wins over them back-to-back years. That wouldn't be a poor draw at all. Borussia Monchengladbach, a good side, been entertaining to watch in the Champions League whenever I've seen them this season, but maybe a bit of naivety. I think if they came up against Liverpool, that cynicism and experience that Liverpool have got would probably see them through. Lazio again, that'd be an interesting one. Nice to have the reunion with Lucas Leiva, I suppose, but again, maybe not the threat that the other sides pose. So yeah, it's some interesting ties in there. Really, it'd be good to see what they get. I think there's a few that I think, like I say, I think Mönchengladbach and Porto are probably the two that Jurgen Klopp, if you asked him privately, would say he'd prefer. But then the rest, all have those, all have the possibility of causing you problems. So yeah, I think maybe fingers crossed for Mönchengladbach or Porto, and then we'll deal with the rest when they come out.
Yeah, definitely. And history, sort of good history for Liverpool with both those sides. Of course, as you say, Porto back-to-back sort of ties with them in the knockout stage in recent seasons en route to reaching finals. And Borussia Monchengladbach, of course, the 1977 European Cup final win. But Atletico Madrid, certainly one team to look out for then. But what about Barcelona? They're a name with plenty of pedigree and history, but do they quite live up to that right now?
I mean, I don't think they do, no. I think certainly they've been better in the Champions League than what they have been in La Liga. I can't say I've watched them too often this season, but everything you sort of read around them is that they are very much struggling. I don't think it's a huge surprise. They didn't get what they wanted during the summer transfer window and stuff like that. Obviously, they kept hold of Lionel Messi, but there was certainly one or two players, Gini Wijnaldum being one of them, that they would quite liked to have had this season. And they're not, obviously as big a team. They don't have the same players as what they used to, but they're still, very much a team to avoid. I think as much as anything else, it would just be that sort of big narrative around it. I think a Liverpool-Barcelona game would be an amazing occasion, but I think you probably want to leave that at least until the quarterfinals, possibly the semi-finals or further down the line. So, yeah, I think that for me would be, certainly one to try and avoid for Liverpool. But if they were to get a Barcelona, I think you'd have to put Liverpool down as favourites at this moment in time, just given the way that the two sides are playing at this moment. So, yeah, there's nobody on there that Liverpool should be absolutely terrified of, but certainly I think, along with Atletico Madrid, Barcelona would be the one that I'd look at and think you'd really, at this stage of the competition, just like to avoid the drama and that sort of thing of that at this moment in time, and just try and give yourself as easy a time as possible, really, not least with all the injuries that Liverpool probably will still have by the time these matches come around.
Yeah, obviously these games will be taking place in February and into early March, of course, as it did last season with Atletico Madrid in the last 16. But David, another team to just maybe flag and talk about is Sevilla, of course. Great European pedigree, usually in the Europa League, and very strong knockout side, finished runners-up to Chelsea in Group E. They may be one of the dark horses as well that Liverpool would rather steer clear of.
Yeah, like you say, great European experience. Obviously, not necessarily in the Champions League, but they know how to get through these knockout ties in the Europa League. And they've given Liverpool difficulties when they faced them recently. I know Jurgen Klopp had said before, hasn't he, that it's one of his least favourite grounds to visit in terms of because Sevilla make it so difficult for you there. He's been there with Dortmund as well. So that could be a difficult tie. Obviously, with the situation we've got with fans not being in, maybe that plays in Liverpool's favour in terms of visiting there and makes it slightly less tricky. But yeah, I think like you say, their experience and know-how around European competition makes them probably one of the teams you do want to avoid, because they could, on a really good day, make things difficult for Liverpool.
Yeah, we are moments away then from the draw getting underway. As I say, as each team comes out the hat, we will give you our live reaction here on the Blood Red channel. Last team, though, to quickly throw at you, Matt, before we do get underway. RB Leipzig, of course, came past Manchester United to get through into the knockout round, and they're a side who now over the last couple of years are beginning to make a name for themselves.
Yeah, very much so. A really interesting side. I really like their manager, Julian Nagelsmann, is somebody that I've been keeping certainly a close eye on. One of those that sort of pops up when you think of a long-term successor potentially to Jurgen Klopp. Obviously still a very young manager. I think he's still in his early 30s and very much doing a brilliant job. I think they're top of the Bundesliga at this moment in time. So certainly a team for Liverpool to avoid in that regard. But again, I think David made the point on Borussia Monchengladbach of them maybe being a little bit naive. I think possibly you could put Leipzig with a very young, inexperienced side into the same sort of bracket, to be honest. So, yeah, it would certainly be an interesting tie to see what happens with that. But, yeah, one of those, again, that I think, given Liverpool the choice, they would rather avoid that.
Yeah, after a bit of work with the ball actually finally getting it open, the draw is underway. Borussia Monchengladbach, Dave, are out of the hat, and they've got Manchester City. I believe they met in the group stage last season, did they?
Yeah, that'd be an interesting one. I think City will probably be pleased with that. Like we say, that level of sort of slight naivety against. Although I tell you what will make this one interesting is we talk about Monchengladbach's naivety. They're a team that have a go, and City we've seen this season sort of struggle when faced with that. Teams who sort of don't just sit in and really get that defence and expose it, because City still do, for me, have problems at the back. So that will be an interesting tie. I think they could give City some problems. I think you're backing Manchester City to get through that tie, but that will be some interesting games there, I think.
Yeah, certainly. Lazio also out of the hat. It's a side that Liverpool can also face. Side we maybe didn't get around to quite talking about. They finished runners-up in Group F with Borussia Dortmund. Matt, and I suppose, as I say, this is a side that Liverpool could have faced, but instead they've got Bayern Munich.
Yeah, Lucas Leiva's side, of course. Lazio, it's would have been an interesting matchup from a Liverpool perspective. But again, it's one of those teams that you don't see play very often. But from what I've heard in Italy, they are, a tricky opponent. And again, that looks like a really good tie on paper. Lazio against a Bayern Munich team who I think very much, along with Liverpool, the favourites for the tournament. It'd be interesting to see how they get on. Certainly, from a Liverpool perspective, moving forward, you've got to sort of have Bayern Munich really in your eye line as one of those who could really challenge Liverpool at the latter stages. So, yeah, a really interesting tie, and Atletico Madrid the next out of the hat, which is just as interesting, if not even more.
Yeah, and this is where we all cross our fingers and hope it's not going to be Liverpool.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't want to be next out of the hat. This, like we
Chelsea.
say, there we go. That's an interesting one, I think. A big test for Frank Lampard because he's a young manager, a team of young players as well. That's a big test for them coming up against a very, very cynical Atletico side that aren't going to let them play the football. It's a real test of character, that one for Chelsea. It'll be very interesting to see how that one goes.
No, certainly, and three draws out of the hat so far. Then Gladbach have Manchester City. Lazio, of course, have also been drawn out of the hat with Bayern Munich, and Chelsea with Atletico Madrid. It is, Matt, I suppose at this stage of the competition, you look at all the draws and say, those look quite nice on paper, but Atletico Madrid versus Chelsea, that is quite a big one for the last 16.
Yeah, it's very similar to Liverpool Atletico last season. Is it a really tasty matchup? It'd be interesting to see how Chelsea's attackers get on with that. And in fact, Liverpool have just come out of the hat against RB Leipzig. So very, very interesting draw for Liverpool. I mentioned Julian Nagelsmann before. Very, very interesting team. Obviously, Liverpool and Leipzig with the Timo Werner saga that seemed to go on for a long time over the summer. Lots of links between the two clubs, something we've explored plenty of times on Blood Red. And yeah, my initial reaction is that would be a really entertaining draw, and certainly a team that Liverpool will fancy themselves against, but I think a really interesting one for the neutral, not just for Liverpool fans.
I think. Sorry, guy. I think Liverpool will probably see that as a good draw, to be honest. I've watched quite a lot of RB Leipzig this season in the Champions League, and sort of the thing that struck me about them is maybe that without Timo Werner, they're a little bit toothless at times. I know they perhaps didn't look it when they beat Manchester United quite comfortably, but generally sort of haven't looked that much, like they've got that much cutting edge in terms of attack without Timo Werner. I think they've struggled to create goals at times, and defensively not always completely secure either. So I think Liverpool will see that as a good tie. I think it's, under Nagelsmann, much like Hoffenheim, I thought was played some nice football at times, but not always the most convincing in terms of seeing out results. So I think Liverpool will back themselves to get through that one, because obviously they've got the experience of getting through in these ties that RB Leipzig perhaps don't have, and also I think in terms of the quality comparison between the squads, Liverpool will obviously come out quite strong favourites in that tie. So I think they'll be pretty happy with that one, to be honest.
Yeah, of course. Also, there's those transfer rumours, Matt, with Dayot Upamecano.
Yeah, as I say, plenty of links between the sides. I think Leipzig look like they're going to be signing Dominic Szoboszlai, I think is how you pronounce it, from
Did well there.
RB Salzburg. Yeah, that's the last time I'm going to attempt that name before the tie. But I think I'm right in saying that he would, if he did sign, be able to play. I think they changed the rules, didn't they, a couple of seasons ago? So be interesting to see a couple of their players come out and play against Liverpool. Again, Upamecano is one of them. There's one or two other names in there that I think are really interesting young players to come through. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they do match up against Liverpool, and tactically as well. How do they go about it? Do they play the usual game? I think if they do, Liverpool very much will fancy themselves. So yeah, very, very interesting tie, and one or two more to come out as well. Barcelona PSG looks like a tasty one.
Yeah, that certainly does. And we've also missed Porto versus Juventus. Last one quickly on the Liverpool draw before we look through the others, Dave, and recap what has gone on. But it seems as though it'll be a nice match of styles. Two sides who like to play attacking football and both playing quite similar styles. We've obviously seen a few players move from the RB and Red Bull clubs to Liverpool.
Oh, sorry, it's just breaking up for me
Yeah,
now, guys.
no. I was going to say, I don't know if you can hear me now. In terms of style, it's quite a nice matchup between Liverpool and Leipzig. No, I'll come to you. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
It's the wonders of doing things live.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the style and the tactics, obviously we know that Liverpool have been keeping an eye on Red Bull Salzburg in particular and Leipzig as well. Obviously, very much a continuity between those two teams. Jesse Marsch, somebody that we spoke to around a year or so ago in terms of Minamino and the way that they play, the sort of even the fact that Jurgen Klopp has influenced both of those teams in the way that he sets up his team. There's certainly elements of that. You think of Ralf Rangnick, who was there at Leipzig until not too long ago, certainly a huge influence on Jurgen Klopp and the way that he sets his teams up these days in terms of the pressing, the tactics, the formation, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think there's so many storylines that it's brilliant for us as journalists to be able to explore all of those things. And, I think that's it's certainly, as I say, a good draw in terms of entertainment for the neutral. I think, we've seen plenty of Leipzig over the last couple of seasons, but I think they are a growing force. I think this is a huge task for them to come to Liverpool and knock them out. But, it'll be interesting to see how they get on, because they've certainly impressed me, not just in terms of the style and the tactics, but on an individual basis as well. There's been lots of players, obviously Timo Werner, the biggest of those names, but plenty of others to keep an eye on coming out of that system as well.
It'd be interesting to see how those two sort of styles meld together in one match almost. I think the one thing you would say about Liverpool, though, they do have that high pressing style that RB Leipzig also sort of uses, that they've probably got more string to the bow these days, haven't they, in terms of how they approach games and how they manage games. So I think it'd be interesting to see if Liverpool don't just turn this into an out-and-out pressing contest and back their individual quality, or whether they just think we can be a bit more considered here, sort of look to control possession and take the opportunities away from Leipzig and be sort of safe in possession and not allow those pressing opportunities and go about it that way. So it's a fascinating tie in terms of the tactical approach both sides make. It'll be two really exciting games, I'm sure.
It certainly will be that. So, of course, those ties yet to be precisely confirmed, but to take place over the course of the first leg, over the course of the midweek of the 16th and 17th of February, and also the 23rd and 24th. And the return legs will be on the 9th and 10th and 16th and 17th of March. Of course, then the draw for the quarterfinals and semi-finals will come into place. The draw in full then: Atletico Madrid against Chelsea, Lazio against Bayern Munich, Gladbach versus Manchester City, Liverpool have RB Leipzig, Porto versus Juventus, Barcelona v PSG, Atalanta against Real Madrid, and Sevilla against Borussia Dortmund. Of all of those, Matt, other than the Liverpool game, of course, which one takes your fancy?
Oh, it's a difficult one. There's a couple of really interesting ones. I think Atletico Madrid would be the one against Chelsea that I would pick out, purely because obviously we know how Atletico played against Chelsea last season. There's been lots of talk about the signings that Chelsea made, the attacking additions. You wonder, how much will they be able to test Atletico Madrid? Atletico very much impressive again so far this season. I think that'll be a really interesting matchup. They're not always the most exciting and thrilling games, are they, against Atletico Madrid? But certainly from a tactical perspective and the way that Chelsea and Atletico go at it, I think that'll be a really, really interesting one. I think potentially if Chelsea were to get through in that one, that would certainly do Liverpool a favour at some point further down the line.
Yeah, certainly. Well, last night, of course, Dave, Neymar was stretchered off with what seemed to be an ankle injury, but Barcelona versus PSG, that seems to be a headline grabber as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the whole story that's going on at the moment between the two clubs around Lionel Messi and Neymar, whether one's going to take one off the other, is a really interesting backdrop to that one. So I suppose we'll know by the time this tie has been played whether one of those players goes either way in January. It's an interesting one. They've got that recent history as well. The comeback win a few years back as well. It was an incredible tie, and I think it'd be interesting. I think for PSG, I think in recent years they would have maybe fancied themselves less against Barca than they do now. But having had that experience to get into the final last season, Barcelona, we're watching them sort of undergo a bit of a decline at the moment, aren't we? They don't look quite the same side. So I think PSG will fancy themselves to get through that one. And Barcelona, I think it's going to be difficult. PSG aren't perfect. I think they've got weaknesses that we saw even in the group stage with them getting through. But I think Barcelona just aren't well placed to sort of exploit those weaknesses at the moment. So PSG will fancy themselves, but either way, I expect goals in both those games. So that is a really interesting side.
Yeah, it certainly is. There on the screen, we've got, of course, the draw in full. Matt, before we go, just going to ask you the chances of the English sides then. Manchester City have Borussia Monchengladbach. We've spoken about Chelsea versus Atletico. Of course, Manchester United dropped out in the group phase. Do you think we're more likely to see all three teams through to the quarterfinals, or do you think we might only see one or two?
Yeah, I mean, I think my instinct would be to go with two. I think Manchester City, Borussia Monchengladbach will be a couple of really, really interesting games. I think they'll both go at it. I think there'll be plenty of goals in both of those games, but you'd think that City just about should have enough to get through against Borussia Monchengladbach. I think Gladbach went to Real Madrid, didn't they, and won there, or certainly had one or two very, very good results in this Champions League group stage this season. So certainly a team to watch out for, but you'd expect that Guardiola and Manchester City to get through in that one. Chelsea, Atletico, I think you've got to have Atletico Madrid as slight favourites in that one, just in terms of the way they set up. And then Liverpool, Leipzig, very, very difficult for Liverpool. But again, I think you'd put them as favourites certainly in that one. So yeah, three really interesting ties. Just a quick one in terms of the Liverpool games and when they fall in terms of the schedule. Could be a big week in February. Liverpool go to Leicester, then they play Leipzig away, and then they host Everton the weekend after that. So should be a very, very exciting week, hopefully with fans back in stadiums by that point in time as well.
Yeah, certainly. Well, that wraps us up here on the Blood Red channel for the Champions League last 16 draw. Thanks for joining us. Liverpool then knowing that they will take on RB Leipzig in the round of 16. That to take place in February and early March. My thanks go to David Lynch and to Matt Addison for joining me here for this live draw on the Blood Red channel. Don't forget the Blood Red podcast will be with you later in the day as we continue our tributes to the passing of former Liverpool manager Gerard Houllier, who has unfortunately passed away at the age of 73. But thanks for joining us here on the Blood Red channel.